Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life Stories Podcast, People Helping People. I'm Shara Goswick, your host. My guest today is Carrie Ducote. Carrie is an animal shelter consultant, and she has a business called Shelter Savvy. She does in-person and virtual visits with animal shelters and works with the people there who want to make their shelter run effectively and smoothly and for the benefit of the community and for the animals, obviously. I love what she's doing. She's been doing this for over a decade. I think it's super important because I think animal shelters get overlooked sometimes. If you're not actively looking for a pet, it's probably not something that you think about very often. And so I think her work is very important. We love animals in our house, so I loved talking to her. I thank you for being
Carrie, I
here.
appreciate you talking to me today. I am a pet lover. We have had multiple dogs, and our our kids are grown, and so our golden retriever is like our fourth child. She's very spoiled, very much like a baby. You've done some incredible things. You've managed large companies and done all these things, but everything has to do with animals. Everything is about animal welfare. Is working with animals, is that something you always wanted to do growing up?
Probably, I'm not sure I realized it until later, but I was always, I always found animals and brought them home. I had like a varying amount of stray cats that I brought home growing up. And so I was always, a big animal person. And then I went to college and started studying engineering. I was always really good at math. My dad's an engineer, so I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And then I took calculus 2 and did not do that well in it, and, decided to change my career, and my mom, reminded me how much I love animals, and so I switched my career to or switched my major to biology and started working volunteering at the local shelter where I went to school, and just really fell in love with it.
So what about those early times working at the shelter? How did that what did that teach you from the very beginning before you started doing all the things that you're doing? Because 'Cause you've worked on some national levels, I mean, big deals. So what did you learn from the very beginning when you were volunteering?
Well, I think what really hit me when I started volunteering, this was in 2007 at a really small animal shelter in Milledgeville, Georgia, where I went to school. And most of their dogs were housed in just pop-up crates. They didn't have very many. It was a private shelter. It wasn't a municipal shelter. They didn't have very many dogs, but it was like when I got there in the morning to walk them, they hadn't been out since the day before. They were so excited to see me. They were so excited to get a chance to go outside to, go potty. I remember this one dog, like as soon as you took him out of the crate, he would just pee. Like he had just been waiting.
Oh.
And so it just really, I think, felt really tangible, the impact that I was making for them. It was very apparent. And, if I ever felt like I didn't feel like going or wanted to skip a day volunteering, then, it just wasn't a possibility because the animals, you know, wouldn't go out then. Um, and so I think it just really became about seeing the impact that I was able to have for these animals and then just seeing them, come in off the streets and, covered in fleas, unquite, whatever. And we would bathe them and feed them and then see them, get restored health and then see them get adopted. It just became really addictive.
Yeah, I can imagine that's very rewarding. Tell me about Shelter Savvy. Tell me about that program because I think this is wonderful. I know that there's so many shelters that need help and need guidance and need assistance and need so many things, but what you're doing is awesome. So talk about that a little bit.
So I've been working with shelters like I said since 2007 and done all kinds of different things with them. And in 2023, started my own consulting company, Shelter Savvy. So that company has really given me the opportunity to partner with shelters in lots of different ways. And I have, one shelter locally that I was able to really help from the ground up. They started off with having, a brick and mortar location, but not much else. And so I was able to really help them, build a budget and do some board development and get their licensing and SOPs in place and really do everything from the ground up. And then I work for some other large municipal shelters nationally, and been able to go in and spend, a week at the shelter and provide reports on what's going well and what I might recommend to change there. And uh, then I've been able to partner, with a lot of elected officials and municipal governments to see those changes through.
That's awesome. What is the first thing you look for when you walk into a shelter?
Well, the very first thing I think is just really the way that the staff is reacting. I've learned a lot be going from being a volunteer myself to, animal care specialist is what we called it as a kennel tech, then adoption counselor. I really had all of the roles in the animal shelter. And so find a lot of the shelters that are struggling with, high euthanasia, with high intake, with low adoptions. The staff is just really, really struggling as a result of that. I mean, how could they not?
Right.
So the very first thing that I look at, when I walk in a shelter is the way that the staff responds to me. Um, there's only one shelter that I was sort of surprised showed up at. The rest of them know that I'm coming, right? So I sort of like them to be on their best behavior
Right.
and factor that into my report. But so if they're, kind and welcoming and want to talk to me and want to show me around, then that's always a good sign. But if they're sort of skeptical and grouchy and seem like I'm really bothering them by being there, then to me that's a sign that they are not being listened to, they're not being respected. They're there, because they want to take care of the animals. Otherwise, they would be out the door already because nobody touches for the money. That's a big concern of mine. The frontline staff, the adoption counselors, the kennel techs, animal control officers, those are really the blood of any kind of animal shelter. And so when they are not treated well, when they are not feeling respected, when their morale is low, then really the whole organization suffers.
Yeah. For people that don't find their pets at shelters, or they are just not familiar with the shelters, what is something that we don't realize that goes on there or that needs to happen there?
Well, I think most people don't understand the difference in shelters. So, there's municipal animal shelters, animal pounds. Those are shelters that are run by cities, counties, municipal governments. And those shelters are usually required to take in strays and they take in some owner shrinkers, or it depends on their policies. But they usually are not in a place to be able to turn down strays, to have owner surrenders. So those are what traditionally has been labeled as kill shelters because for them, it's really just an inventory management issue where you have so many animals coming in, you cannot turn them down, and not enough animals going out. And when we have so much space, and so you end up having to euthanize as a form of population control, which is really, really difficult for staff. So I think it's important for people to understand that about euthanizing animals, that the reason that people are having to do that is as a result of it's a whole community problem in terms of there being too many animals and not enough homes, and not necessarily a symptom of the person who's actually making that decision.
Yeah. I'm assuming that you would highly recommend people spay and neuter their pets so that there isn't an overpopulation of um, animals. I live out in the country and there's often not right by my home, but there's often animals dumped, puppies and, litters of kittens dumped out because people ended up with them and they didn't want them. I mean, to me, the only way to fix that is to make sure we spay and neuter our pets. Is that something that you highly recommend for pet owners?
Well, yeah, I think it's more complicated than just
Yeah.
spay neuter, because I love dogs, obviously, and I want my children to have dogs, and so we can't spay neuter every dog in the
Well, not all of them.
right? We in the entire species. So, My mother-in-law breeds dogs, and she is wonderful the way that she cares for them and the way that she brings them into the world and finds homes for them. So, I don't think it's necessarily a thing where everybody needs to spay and neuter their dogs all the time. I think
Right.
there's definitely a time and a place for breeding, and I want to make sure that the people who are responsible breeding, so to speak, have the ability to continue to do that. There's also been a lot of corporatization, is that a word? Corporatization of veterinary clinics nationally, where a lot of these small veterinary clinics are being bought up by national corporations, and that is causing veterinary care expenses to just skyrocket.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, spaying and neutering a dog, you're talking about hundreds of dollars, even at a low cost clinic, hundreds of dollars at a private clinic. I mean, sometimes upwards of thousands of dollars, depending on where you are. And so it's not necessarily that we need to convince people to spay and neuter. I think that we in the industry need to do a better job of making spay and neuter accessible and affordable.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard. But once we actually open up our doors to people, anybody who wants to get their animal sterilized but can't afford it, let me know. I'll help you. Then we find people, our phones are ringing off the hook. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think it's just way I know that's very complicated answer. It's cost um, absolutely, anybody who isn't intentionally looking to breed their dogs are been spayed and neutered for all kinds of reasons. But I also think that us within the industry need to recognize that it's way more complicated than that, and people aren't necessarily, choosing to breed their dogs or choosing not to sterilize their dogs because they, just don't want to. Sometimes people don't even know that it's possible.
Right.
I've talked to people who are like, "What do you mean? There's a surgery that I can give them, and they won't have any more babies? That sounds awesome." And so just being able to bring that to people.
You mentioned earlier about it being a community issue. And what does it look like when a shelter truly becomes community centered rather than just facility focused, just about their specific needs?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, municipal shelters especially are taking in a lot of stray animals from the community. They're taking in usually owner-friendly animals. So it's easy for people at the municipal shelter to just get really frustrated and blame the community for everything and say, it's all fault. But when you look at well-managed municipal shelters, you see that they see the community as the solution and not as the problem. And so then they're flipping it to, how can I ask the community for help so that we can work together to solve this problem? It's more about outreach and connecting with people in low income neighborhoods and finding out, do they need dog food? Do they need flea and tick and heartworm prevention? Do they need leashes and crates and dog food? And once you sort of make those connections, then it's a really easy jump to, oh, by the way, can I get your animal fixed for you? And those are the types of things that really cause long term solutions and create a much healthier community because animals are sterilized, they're vaccinated, and adoption really becomes the first option for people who are looking to add a pet to their family.
Yeah, that's good. I know you've trained hundreds of shelter professionals. What is one skill that you wish they would learn? One mindset you wish every shelter worker would have?
I think it's just really about change management, right? It's like it's really hard to have somebody, I recognize this, to have somebody from the outside, being me, come in and tell them, like, this is what you have to do, these 4 things, when they've been doing it that way forever. And so, and what I see a lot is once they start making recommend, then typically it leads to a strong reduction in euthanasia. And that can be really, really emotional for people. Reduction in euthanasia can be really, really hard for people to recognize, like, I have been euthanizing animals this whole time and saying, it's not my fault. It's the community's fault. There's nothing that I could have done differently to prevent this. And then once they actually start doing the things that I recommend, they realize that that narrative hasn't necessarily been true. And that's really difficult for people. So I think I would want people to recognize more, the place that their own mental health plays in this, in terms of protecting themselves from going to the place guilt or grief for the animals that they lost before the decisions that they made.
So, for somebody that's listening today who wants to support their local shelter, what's the most impactful thing they can do?
If you're able to adopt, then always adoption is huge, of course. But that's something that people do like maybe a couple of times in their lives. They recognize that. And if you're not able to adopt, then you can always volunteer and walk dogs. That makes walk dogs, pet cats, do laundry, dishes, whatever. You can volunteer at home by sharing animals that are looking for a home on social media.
Yeah.
Um, you can foster. I think that's something that's overlooked by a lot of people, which is, when you take an animal that's medically or behaviorally unable to be adopted, maybe it's too young, maybe it's, undergoing medical treatment, just had surgery, needs to recover, and you take it into your home and let it recover in your house. And all of the supplies are provided by the shelter, and all of the medical care is covered by the shelter. So there's no financial responsibility on a part of the foster. So I always recommend the pupils try that. I know that it's hard to give them back. That's the number one reason I think people love foster gut. Um, and then, donations, either financial donations if your shelter is able to accept them, or just blankets, newspapers, dog toys, things like that can make a really big difference for animals in a shelter.
Yeah, this is so important. And I know people who will only go to a shelter to get a pet. And I think it's amazing. Working with people is always going to be different. Like you said, different personalities and different, attitudes about things. And so I know there's lots of work to be done, but I think what you're doing is very important. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you want to tell me about?
I think I would encourage people also who are looking to adopt to consider adopting older dogs. There's a lot of people for varying reasons only want to adopt puppies, and I totally understand that. I've adopted a couple of puppies myself, and honestly, it's been horrible. I hate puppies.
They're babies.
They are the worst.
Yeah.
I would never adopt a puppy again. So I just wanted to plug adult dogs because adult dogs, especially right now, are staying in shelters longer than they ever have before. And they are honestly wonderful. Most of them have been, in a home before. They've already been trained. They have some, context for what it's like to be in a home. And so anybody who's really open to skipping that puppy phase, please consider adopting an adult dog because they really are.
Yeah, they are very special. I had someone on the podcast last year, maybe earlier this year. Well, not this year, it was 2025. She grooms older animals. She grooms older pets and she goes to their home, the home and does it. And it's very important. It's very special, but it's a different kind of help that you have to give for those older pets. So that is a great idea. I thank you so much for talking to me today. I appreciate what you're doing. I think it's important and I am excited to share with everybody.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking to me and dealing with my dogs being
Oh, yeah. It happens. It happens. Can't imagine life without them, though. So, well, thank you, Carrie. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye bye.